The Adventures of Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain.
Chapter 1. Aunt Polly decides her duty.
Tom?
No answer.
Tom!
No answer. The old lady looked around the room.
When I find you, I'd...
She did not finish. With her head down, she was looking under the bed. Only the cat came out. She went to the open door and looked toward the garden. No Tom was there. She shouted,
You, Tom!
There was a little noise behind her. She turned and caught a small boy, stopping him before he could escape.
What were you doing in that corner? Nothing. Nothing? What is that on your hands and face?
I do not know, Aunt Polly.
I know. You've been eating sweets. I have told you 100 times not to eat those sweets.
Her hand was raised in the air. It started down. It was very near.
Oh, look behind you, Aunt.
The old lady turned. The boy ran. In a moment he was up on the high board fence. Then he was on the far side of it. His Aunt Polly was surprised. Then she laughed a little.
That boy, I never know what he will do next. And he knows that I do not want to hit him, but I should. And if he does not go to school this afternoon, I must make him work tomorrow. He does not like work, especially on Saturday when there is no school. He does not like work. All the other boys will be playing, but I must try to make him a good boy. He is my dead sister's son, and it is my duty. I must do my duty.
Tom did not go to school, and he had a very happy afternoon. He came home late. He hurried to do his share of the evening work. His brother Sid had already finished his share. Sid was a quiet boy who had no adventures and also no troubles. While Tom sat eating, his Aunt Polly asked questions. She hoped to learn about his afternoon.
Tom, was it warm in school? Yes, Aunt Polly. Did you wish to go swimming, Tom?
Tom began to feel afraid. What did she know about this afternoon?
No, Aunt Polly, not very much.
She touched his shirt. It was dry. But Tom knew what she would touch next. He said quickly,
But some of us put water on our heads because we were hot. My hair is not dry yet.
He watched her face. Yes, she believed him. He was safe. And Aunt Polly was glad to believe that he had been good. The summer evenings were long. Tom walked along the street, whistling like a bird. Then he stopped whistling. He had met a stranger, a boy a little larger than he was. The boy's clothes were new and good, and he was wearing shoes. Tom would wear shoes and good clothes like these only to church on Sunday. Tom looked and looked. The boy's clothes seemed to become better and better, and his own clothes seemed to grow poorer. Neither boy spoke. If one moved, then the other moved. But they moved only to the side, in a circle. They remained face to face and eye to eye. Then Tom said,
I can beat you. Try. I can. No, you can't. Yes, I can. No, you can't. I can. You can't. Can't.
A moment of quiet. Then Tom said,
I could beat you with one hand. Do it. You say you can do it. That hat. Hit it off my head if you can. I will. You are afraid. I'm not afraid. You are. I'm not. You are.
More moving in a circle. Now they were shoulder to shoulder, each trying to make the other fall back. And then suddenly they were rolling in the dust. Each pulled at the other's hair, and each hit the other's nose. And now through the dust Tom appeared, sitting on the new boy, beating him with hard, closed hands.
Have you had enough?
Said he. The boy tried to get free. He was weeping with anger.
Have you had enough?
Then the new boy said,
Enough.
Tom let him stand up and walk away. But as soon as Tom turned, the new boy threw a stone, hitting Tom's back. Therefore Tom followed him home and waited. The boy did not come out again. His mother came and said that Tom was a bad child. She told him to go home. It was late when Tom got there. Very quietly and carefully, he entered through a window. But his aunt was waiting for him. She had learned from Sid about Tom's afternoon. Now she saw his clothes and knew that he had been fighting. She knew what she must do. Tom would work all day on Saturday. Chapter 2. Strong Desire, Wise Action. Saturday morning came. All the summer world was bright and full of life. Tom appeared in the front of the house with paint and a big brush. He looked at the fence, and all joy left him. A deep sadness settled upon his heart. The fence was long and high. He wet the brush and moved it along the top board. He did it again, and did it again. He looked at what he had done. The painted part was very, very small. The whole fence was very large. He sat down. He felt that he could not continue. Jim, a boy who worked for the family, came through the gate. He was going to get water, and he was singing happily. Tom said,
Jim, I will get the water if you will paint.
Jim said,
No, I must get the water. Are you afraid of Aunt Polly? She won't hurt you. She talks about it, but talk never hurts. It never hurts except when she weeps also. You should not be afraid of her. Jim, I will give you one of my playthings, and I will show you my foot. I will show you where I hurt it.
Jim was only human. He took the plaything, and he put his head down for a look at the foot. In another moment he was running down the street. Tom was painting as fast as possible, and Aunt Polly was returning to the house. But Tom began to think of the pleasure planned for this day. His hands moved more slowly. Soon the other boys would come and laugh at him for working. From his pocket he took everything that he owned. He looked at it. There was nothing of real value. It was not enough to buy another boy's help. At this dark moment, a wonderful idea came to him. It was like a great bright light. He took his brush and went quietly to work. Ben Rogers appeared soon. Tom had been especially afraid of Ben's laugh. Ben was eating an apple. Also, as he walked, he was making noises like those of a big riverboat. He would shout loudly, then he would say, "Ding dong dong," like a bell. Then he would shout again and say, "Ding dong dong," again, and make other strange noises. He was the boat, he was the captain of the boat, and the boat bell. "Turner," he shouted, "slower! Stop!" He made a slow, careful turn, came close beside Tom, and stopped. Tom continued his painting. He did not look at the boat. Ben said, "Hello, you are in trouble." No answer. Tom moved his brush gently and looked at the result. Ben came nearer. Tom wished for the apple, but he did not turn from his work. Ben said, "Hello, you must work, must you?" Tom turned suddenly. "Oh, Ben, is it you? I did not see you. I'm going swimming, I am. Do you wish you could go with me, or would you rather work?" Tom said, "What do you mean, work?" "That is work." Tom returned to his painting.
It may be work and it may not be, but it is fine for Tom Sawyer. Do you mean that you enjoy it? Enjoy it? Does a boy have a chance to paint a fence every day?
Here was a new idea. Ben stopped eating his apple. Tom moved his brush, stepped away to look at the result, added a little paint here and there, stepped away again. Ben watched. He was more and more interested. Then he said,
Tom, let me paint a little.
Tom thought. Then he said,
No, Ben, Aunt Polly wants this fence to be perfect. If it was the fence behind the house, you could help, but this fence beside the street must be done very carefully. There is not one boy in 1,000 who can do it well. Oh, Tom, let me try. Only a little. I will be careful, Tom. I'll give you part of my apple. No, Ben, I'm afraid I will give you all of it.
Tom gave the brush to Ben, slowly, but with joy in his heart. And while the boy, who a few moments before had been a riverboat worker and became hot in the sun, Tom sat under the tree, eating the apple and planning how to get more help. There were enough boys. They came along the street, stopped to laugh, but remained to paint. After Ben, Bill Fisher painted. Then Johnny Miller came. Each one paid to be allowed to work. In the middle of the afternoon, Tom was very rich. He had many playthings, a small cat with one eye, a piece of broken blue glass, and much more. And he had not worked, and the whole fence had been painted 3 times. There was no more paint. With more paint, Tom would soon have owned everything belonging to the other boys, and the other boys in the village would have owned nothing. Tom had discovered a great law of human action. A man or a boy will desire something if it's not easy to get. Chapter 3. Tom is an army officer. Delightful sadness. Tom went to report to Aunt Polly. She was sitting beside an open window. She was half asleep, and she was holding the sleeping cat. She was surprised to see Tom. She thought that he had run away from his work long ago. Tom said,
May I go and play now, Aunt? Already? How much have you done? It is all done, Aunt. Tom, is that true? It makes me sad if you do not tell the truth. It is true, Aunt. It is all done.
She went to see, and her surprise was very great.
You can work when you want to, Tom, but you do not often want to. Go and play, but remember to come home again.
She gave him a large apple. She did not see him take a piece of cake as he passed through the kitchen. Tom hurried to the center of the village. There, 2 armies of boys had met for a battle. Tom was the leader, the general of one army, and his good friend Joe Harper was the general of the other. Tom and Joe did not fight. They sat together and sent their orders to the armies. When the battle was finished, they agreed to have another battle on another day. Then the armies marched away, and Tom started to go home alone. As he passed Jeff Thatcher's house, he saw a new girl in the garden. She had blue eyes and yellow hair. She was beautiful. Tom had loved a girl named Amy Lawrence. A week ago she had said that she loved him. He had been happy and proud, but now, in a moment, she was gone from his heart. He watched the new girl until she discovered him. Then he looked at other places, as if he had not seen her. Then he began to jump and dance and walk on his hands, so that she would continue to watch him. She walked toward the house, and Tom's heart was sad. But she threw a flower over the fence. Then she was gone. Tom looked around. There was no person to see him. Slowly, he picked up the flower. He put it under his shirt, near his heart, and he stayed near the fence until darkness came. Then he went home to eat. He was full of joy. His aunt wondered why. Later that evening, his brother Sid was a bad boy. He took some sweets, but his aunt did not believe that Sid could be bad. She gave Tom the blow that she should have given to Sid. She learned the truth later and was sorry, but she said nothing to Tom. Therefore, Tom was very sorry for himself. He began to wish that he would die. She would feel sorry then. He could see himself being carried home from the river, dead, his hair wet, his troubles past. He went out into the darkness and went to the river. It would be good to drown, if he could drown without pain. He thought of his flower, and took it from inside his shirt. Would the new girl be sad if he died? Would she put her arms around him, or would she turn coldly away? This picture brought him much delightful suffering. He kept it a long time in his mind. Then he started home. He stopped near the Thatcher house. There was a light in one window. Was that the new girl's room? He lay down on the ground below the window, with her flower in his hands. He would lie there and die in the cold. In the morning she would look out the window and see him. The window opened suddenly. He heard the voice of a woman who worked for the Thatchers. She threw water out of the window, and it fell on him. Tom jumped up and ran. Sid opened his eyes and saw Tom, ready for bed, looking at his wet clothes. Tom's wild eyes made Sid afraid. He did not dare to speak, but he would remember and tell his aunt. Chapter 4. Going to Sunday School. The sun rose upon a quiet world and looked warmly down upon the peaceful village. The family began the day by praying together. Then Tom did his Sunday studying. He was trying to learn some words from the Bible. Sid had already finished his studying, but Tom was slow. His mind was busy with other things. Tom was learning 5 verses. Some verses are long and some are short. Tom had found 5 short verses. Aunt Polly's daughter Mary helped him, and after a time he could say the verses without looking at the book. Mary gave him a knife for studying so well. It was not a good knife, but it was a knife. Tom was deeply delighted. Then Mary helped him to dress in his Sunday clothes. He hoped that she would forget his shoes, but she did not. When they were ready, the 3 children went to Sunday school. With his whole heart, Tom wished not to go. Mary and Sid enjoyed going. At the church door, Tom stopped to speak to a friend.
Billy, do you have a yellow ticket?
Yes.
Will you sell it to me? What will you pay for it?
Tom offered enough and received the ticket. Then Tom stopped other boys and bought more tickets, some red and some blue. He was busy with his buying for about 10 minutes. Then he went into the church. These tickets were given for learning the Bible verses. A blue ticket was given for 2 verses. A red ticket was equal to 10 blue tickets. A yellow ticket was equal to 10 red tickets. And for 10 yellow tickets, for learning 2,000 verses, the Sunday school teacher gave the student a Bible. It was a wonderful day when a boy or girl received one of those Bibles. Perhaps Tom did not want the Bible, but he did want the wonderful experience of receiving it. "Now, children," the teacher said, "sit up as straight as possible and listen. That is what good little boys and girls should do." While the teacher was talking, 3 gentlemen and a lady entered the church. The lady was leading a child. When Tom saw this small girl, waves of happiness went over him. He began hitting other boys, pulling their hair, doing everything to force the new girl to look at him and smile. He was quickly forgetting the water the woman threw from her window the night before. The gentleman and the lady went to the front of the church and sat down there. Then the teacher told who they were. One gentleman was Mr. Thatcher, who lived in the village. All knew him. But one was his brother, the great Judge Thatcher. He had traveled. He had seen the world. He came from a large town 12 miles away. The teacher wished that on this day he could give some boy or girl a Bible. He would have been proud to do that. The famous Judge Thatcher would know then that this was a fine Sunday school. But no child had enough yellow tickets. At this moment, when hope was dead, Tom Sawyer came forward. He had 9 yellow tickets, 9 red tickets, and 10 blue tickets. It was like a storm coming from a clear sky. The teacher had not expected Tom to gather so many tickets in 10 years. But here were the tickets. It was the surprise of the year. The teacher knew that it was strange. He could not understand how it had happened. He did not believe that Tom had learned 2,000 verses. He did not believe that Tom had learned 12 verses. The other boys watched Tom. All wished that they too had enough tickets for a Bible. Some boys suffered more deeply because they had sold Tom their tickets. They were able to understand what had happened. Tom had become rich by letting other boys whitewash the fence. He had been rich enough to buy their tickets. And now anger filled them. They saw clearly what fools they had been. Tom stood in a place of honor beside the judge. The judge put his hand on Tom's head and called him a fine little man. Tom could not speak. His breath would not come. His heart was shaking. This was partly because the judge was a great man, but it was chiefly because the judge was her father. The judge asked his name.
Tom?
"Is that all of it?"
Thomas?
"But you have more, perhaps, another name?" "Tell the gentleman your other name, Thomas," said the teacher.
Thomas Sawyer."
"That is a good boy. You are a fine, manly little fellow. 2,000 verses is a very, very great many, and you never can be sorry that you learned them. Learning makes great men and good men. You will be a great man and a good man some day, Thomas. Then you will remember this day. Then you will be glad that you went to Sunday school. Now, Thomas, tell me and this lady some of what you have learned in your Bible verses. We are proud of little boys who learn. Now you know the names of the 12 great followers of Jesus Christ. Tell us the names of the first 2. Tom's face became red, and he looked down at his feet. The teacher knew that Tom could not answer, but he felt that he must speak. He said, "Answer the gentleman, Thomas. Do not be afraid." Tom said nothing.
"Surely you will tell me,"
Said the lady.
The names of the first 2 followers of Jesus Christ were...
Tom remembered 2 names from the Bible. He did not remember who the people were or what they had done, but the 2 names were always together. He shouted them now.
David and Goliath!
But David and Goliath had not been among the 12 great followers of Jesus Christ. Their story was in a different part of the Bible. David was a boy, and Goliath was a man of very great size and strength. They were enemies, and David had killed Goliath. Let us be kind enough to look away from the rest of the scene of Tom Sawyer in Sunday school. Chapter 5. In Church. The bell of the small church began to ring. The people began to gather to hear Mr. Sprague speak to them. Mr. Sprague spoke to them in church every Sunday and prayed with them. The Sunday school children now sat with their fathers and mothers, who would try to keep them quiet. Aunt Polly came, and Tom and Sid and Mary sat with her. Tom was placed as far as possible from the open window and the interesting summer scenes outside. Other people came in and went to their seats. There were the old and poor. There were the middle-aged. There were the pretty girls in bright summer clothes and the young men with their eyes following the girls. There was Mrs. Douglas, whose husband died. She was rich and good-hearted, and she lived in the big house on Cardiff Hill. There was Mufferson, the good boy of the village. He came to church with his mother. All the other mothers talked of his goodness. All the other boys did not like him. Now the bell was heard again, and then the church became very quiet. They were ready to begin. They began with a song. After the song, Mr. Sprague read a very long list of meetings to come in the following week. Then he prayed. He prayed for many things and for many people. He prayed for the church and for the little children of the church and for the other churches of the village and for the village and then for the whole country and for the government and then for people of far-off countries. Tom did not enjoy hearing Mr. Sprague pray, but he knew he must remain quiet. While Mr. Sprague prayed, a flying bug stopped on the back of the seat in front of Tom. It moved its front legs together, one over the other. It put them around its head and seemed to pull until Tom thought the head would separate from the body. It used its back legs to clean its wings, and it did all this slowly, as if knowing that it was safe. And indeed, it was safe. Tom did not dare to reach for it. He believed that his soul would be destroyed suddenly if he did such a thing while Mr. Sprague was praying. But with the last words, his hand began to move forward. When the last word came, the bug was in his hand. But his aunt saw this. She told him to let the bug fly away. Then Mr. Sprague began a longer talk. He read the words he was saying, and Tom counted the pages as he turned them. After church, Tom always knew how many pages there had been. He did not often know what had been said. But this morning Tom was interested for a little while. Mr. Sprague talked about future peace in the world. The strong and powerful nations, he said, would be friends of the weak. The strong, he said, would be like a strong wild animal of the forest. The weak would be like a weak animal of the farm. But the strong animal would not hurt the weak animal. They would lie down beside each other in peace. They would be so gentle and friendly that a little child could lead them. Tom wished to be that child. Then there was no more talk about animals. Again, Tom began to suffer. He remembered a valuable object that he carried, and he took it from his pocket. It was a large black bug in a small box. The bug quickly took a painful hold on Tom's finger. The next moment, the bug was on the floor on its back, and Tom's finger was in his mouth. The bug lay there moving its legs, but it could not get on its feet again. Tom could not reach it. It was too far away, but he watched it. Other people, also not interested in Mr. Sprague's words, found pleasure in watching the bug. Then a dog entered the church. He was sad at heart. He wanted some new, different thing to do. He saw the large black bug, and his tail lifted and moved a little happily. He looked at the bug carefully, walked around it, put his nose nearer, lay down with the bug between his front feet, and began to sleep. His head moved down. It touched the bug, and the bug took a painful hold on his nose. The dog cried loudly, shaking his head, and the bug fell again on the floor, on its back. People sitting near were laughing gently with their faces covered. Tom was completely happy. The dog seemed like a fool, and perhaps felt like a fool. There was anger in his heart also. He went near the bug again and began jumping at it. Moving in a circle, he jumped again and again. Then he had had enough of jumping. He found a smaller bug and followed it for a while. Then he had had enough of the smaller bug. Forgetting the large black bug, he sat down on it. With a wild cry of pain, he went running around the church. The bug kept its hold. The dog ran across the front of the church and across the back. His cries grew louder and louder. Then he jumped into his owner's arms. His owner threw him out a low window. Then slowly the sound of his voice grew softer and was gone as he quickly ran away. Now all the people in the church had red faces and were trying not to laugh. Mr. Sprague had stopped speaking. He began again, but it was not easy for him to continue. Here and there a laugh could be heard. All were glad when it was time to go home. Tom Sawyer went home quite happy. Church was a pleasure when something different happened. There was only one thing that he did not like. He was glad to let the dog play with his bug, but the dog should not have carried it away. Chapter 6. A Talk of Devils. Happy Hours. The next morning, Tom was very sad. This was the beginning of another week of slow suffering in school. He usually began this day wishing that there had been no Saturday and no Sunday. Because of them, school seemed more painful to him. He lay in bed thinking. If he were sick, he could stay home. He thought carefully about all the parts of his body, but he could discover no sickness. Then he looked at his foot. His foot had been hurt. He had an idea. He began to cry as if with pain. But Sid, in his bed across the room, continued to sleep. Tom's voice grew louder. Now he seemed to feel real pain in his foot. No result from Sid. Tom said,
Sid! Sid!
and tried shaking him. This time the result was good. When Tom cried again, Sid sat up and looked at him. He said,
Tom, what's wrong?
No answer. Now Sid tried shaking Tom. Tom said,
Oh, do not do that, Sid. It hurts me. I must call Aunt Polly. No, do not call her, he cried loudly again. Then he said, I will forget everything bad you have ever done to me, Sid, when I'm dead. Oh, Tom, are you dying? Give back Cat with one eye to that new girl and tell her
But Sid was gone. He ran to his aunt.
"Oh, Aunt Polly, Tom is dying." "Dying? I can't believe it."
But she ran. Her face was white with fear. At the bedside she cried,
"Tom, Tom, what is wrong?" "It is my foot, Aunt, where I hurt it. The doctor must cut it off."
The old lady sat down in a chair and laughed a little, then wept a little, then did both together. Feeling better, she said,
"Tom, you stop that and get out of bed."
Tom stopped crying. And the pain stopped too. As he walked to school, he met Huckleberry Finn. Huckleberry's father was always drunk. None of the mothers in the village liked Huckleberry, but all the children liked him. They wished that they dared to be like him. Tom also wished he could be like Huckleberry. He had been ordered never to play with him. Therefore, he played with Huckleberry every time it was possible. Huckleberry was always dressed in old clothes. The clothes were always too big for him. His hat was full of holes. The bottom of his coat touched the ground. He came and went as he wished. He did not sleep in a bed. He did not sleep in a house. He did not go to school or to church. He could go swimming or fishing when and where he might choose. He was the first boy to wear no shoes in the early summer. He was the last boy to wear shoes in the early winter. He never washed. He had everything that any boy could desire. Tom said,
"Hello, Huckleberry."
"Hello yourself."
"What's that?"
"Dead cat."
"Let me see him, Huck. Where'd you get him?"
"From a boy."
"Why do you want him, Huck?"
"To take off these warts." Huckleberry showed Tom the small spots of thick, hard skin on his hands. "I take 'em off with a bean, Huck." "Yes, bean is good. I've done that."
"How did you do it?"
"You take the bean and break it in 2 pieces. Then you cut the wart and get some blood. Then you put the blood on half the bean. You make a hole in the ground. You put that half of the bean in the hole and cover it with earth. You must do this in the middle of the night where 2 roads cross and when the moon is dark. Then you burn the other half of the bean. The piece of bean with the blood on it will try to pull the other half to it, and that helps the blood to pull the wart, and it's gone from your hand."
"Yes, that is right, Huck. Although when you put the bean in the ground, you should say, 'Down bean, off wart, appear no more.' But how do you take off warts with a dead cat?"
"You wait until a dead body of some bad person has been put in the ground. Then you take your cat and you go to that place before the middle of the night. At the middle of the night, a devil will come to carry the dead man away. Perhaps 2 or 3 devils will come. You can't see them. You can only hear a sound like the wind. Or perhaps you can hear them talk. And then, when they take the body away, you throw the cat after them. You say, 'Devil follow body, cat follow devil, warts follow cat.' And that'll take off any wart."
"Did you ever try it?"
"Not yet."
"Huck, when are you going to do it?"
"Tonight. I think that they will come to get old Hoss Williams tonight."
"But they put him in the ground Saturday. The devils would take him Saturday night."
"The devils can't come out until 12. At 12 on Saturday night, it is Sunday. Devils can't come on Sunday."
"I never thought of that. Let me go with you."
"If you won't be afraid."
"Afraid? Will you come to my house and call to me? Make a noise like a cat."
"Yes, but you answer. 'Nother night I came to your house saying meow, meow like a cat, but you never answered, and your neighbor threw stones at me.'"
"Aunt Polly was watching me, but I will meow this time."
Tom continued walking to school. He went in quickly and sat in his seat. The teacher looked at him. "Thomas Sawyer, Tom knew that trouble was coming when his whole name was used. "Why are you late again?" Tom looked around the room. He saw the new girl. No girl sat in the seat beside her, and the girls sat in all the other seats on the girls' side of the room. He said,
I stopped to talk with Huckleberry Finn.
all the children looked at Tom. It was very foolish to say that to a teacher. "Thomas Sawyer, I never heard more surprising words. Take off your coat." The teacher had a supply of thin branches cut from a tree. He used and broke several of these while beating Tom's back. Then he ordered, "Go and sit with the girls." The new girl turned her back toward Tom. Then, after a short time, she turned toward him, and she saw an apple on the table in front of her. She moved it away. Tom gently moved it toward her. She moved it away again. Tom returned it. Then she let it remain where he had placed it. Now Tom began to make a picture on a piece of paper. He held one hand over it while he worked, and she could not see it. She tried to see. He seemed not to notice her interest. Then she said,
Let me see.
He showed her. It was a picture of a house. It was not good, but she thought it was.
It is nice. Now make a man.
The man was bigger than the house.
It is beautiful. Now make me.
He made a picture of another person.
That is very nice. I wish I could make pictures. I would teach you at noon. Do you go home to eat? I will stay if you stay. Good. What is your name? Becky Thatcher. What is yours? Oh, I know. It is Thomas Sawyer. That is my name when they beat me. I am Tom when I am good. You call me Tom, will you? Yes.
Now Tom began writing something, hiding it with his hand. She asked to see.
Oh, it is nothing. You don't want to see it. Yes, I do. You would tell what it is. I promise never to tell. Oh, you do not want to see. I will see.
She put her small hand on his, and then Tom let her pull the writing away. She read these words.
I love you. Oh, you bad thing.
And she hid his hand, but her face showed pleasure. At this moment the boy felt a hand on his ear and a pull lifting him from the seat. He was returned to his usual seat. The whole school laughed. But although Tom's ear hurt, his heart was joyful. Chapter 7. An Agreement is Made. At noon, Tom ran to Becky and said softly in her ear,
Start to go home with the others, and then return here. I will do the same.
Soon both had returned. Now they were alone in the school. They sat together, and Tom put his hand on Becky's, guiding it. They made a picture of another house. Then they talked. Tom was filled with happiness. He said,
Becky, were you ever engaged? What does that mean? Did you ever promise to marry any boy? No. Would you like to be engaged? What do you do? You tell a boy you will marry him. Then you kiss. That is all. It is easy. Why do you kiss? They always do that. Do you remember what I was writing? Yes. What was it? Shall I tell you? Yes, but not now. Tomorrow. No, now. I will say it quietly, Becky, close to your ear. He put his arm around her and he said the words quietly. Now, you tell me. She made him turn his face away. Then she came near. Her breath moved his hair as she said, I love you. Then she jumped away from him and ran around the seats, with Tom running after her. He caught her in a corner with her hands over her face, but her hands dropped. Tom kissed her and said, Now it is all finished, Becky. And always after this you can't love any boy except me, or marry any boy except me. And you can't marry any girl but me. Certainly that is part of it. And we will walk to school together because we are engaged. It is nice. I never heard of it before. Oh, it is fine. Me and Amy Lawrence, The big eyes told him that he had said the wrong thing. Oh, Tom, I am not the first that you were engaged to. She began to weep. I do not love her now. I do not love any girl except you. More weeping. Tom took from his pocket the thing he valued most. It was a ball-shaped object of no worth, but as bright as gold. Becky, take this. She hid it from his hand to the floor. Then, filled with anger, Tom marched out of the school and over the hills and far away. He would return no more that day. Becky had not really wanted him to go, and when he did not return within a few moments, she called, Tom, come back. Then she wept again.
Chapter 8. Tom Decides What to Do. Half an hour later, Tom was beyond Mrs. Douglas's house on Cardiff Hill. He entered a thick forest, went to the center of it, and sat down under a tree. He was very sad. He wished that he could die. For a short time. But soon he began to think again of living. He would go far away to countries across the sea. How would Becky feel then? He would be a soldier and return famous after many wars. No, he would join the Indians and hunt and fight with them in the far west. But no, there was something better. He would sail across the seas in a long, fast, black ship. He would follow other ships, take the gold and silver they carried, and then send them to the bottom of the sea. That was it. He would be a pirate, famous in the whole world. Tom Sawyer the pirate. Yes, it was decided. He would start his journey the next morning. At this moment he heard a call from far away in the forest. He went to a place very near where he kept some of his things. From this place he took a long knife made of wood. He tied it to his side. He was not Tom Sawyer now. He dreamed he had become a famous leader named Robin Hood, who lived with his men hundreds of years before in another forest. He advanced slowly, moving carefully from behind one tree to another. Believing for the moment that he really was Robin Hood, he said, Stay where you are, my men. Do not move until I call. Now Joe Harper appeared. He, too, had a long wooden knife. Tom called, Stop! Who comes here into Sherwood Forest? No person enters my forest until I say that he may. I am Guy of Guisborne, said Joe Harper, continuing the game. I go where I wish. Who are you? I am Robin Hood, as you shall soon know when you lie dead there on the ground. Are you indeed that famous man? Gladly I will fight with you. They took their two long knives and began a slow, careful fight. Then Tom said, Now fight faster. They were soon hot from their efforts. "Fall," Tom said. "You must fall." "You fall. I'm fighting better than you." "But the story of Robin Hood says that I kill you. Turn and let me hit you in the back." Joe turned, received the blow, and fell. "Now," Joe said, rising, "you must let me kill you." "I can't do that. It is not in the story." "It should be." "Joe, you can be Robin Hood for a while. I will be Robin's enemy, and you can kill me." This was agreeable, and more fighting followed. Then Tom became Robin Hood again, and he was hurt, and all his blood ran from his body. And Joe, who had now become all of Robin Hood's men, watched with tears in his eyes as Robin Hood died. Then the boys went home. They were sad because Robin Hood had lived so long ago. They would have liked living with him in Sherwood Forest better than being President of the United States. Chapter 9. Indian Joe Explains. At 9 that night, Tom and Sid were sent to bed as usual. They prayed, and Sid was soon asleep. Tom was waiting. Time passed very slowly. Little noises came out of the darkness. The cry of a far-off dog was heard in the night air and was answered by another dog. By that time, Tom was asleep. Then there came among his dreams the call of a cat. A neighbor opened a window. Tom heard this, and a minute later he was through his window. He meowed as he went. Then he jumped. Huckleberry Finn was there, with his dead cat. In half an hour, the boys were in the graveyard. The graveyard was on a hill, a mile and a half from the village. There was an old board fence around it. A light wind sounded in the trees, and Tom was afraid that the sound came from the spirits of the dead. The boys talked little. The time and the place and the quiet were heavy on their hearts. They found the new grave and sat down under the branches of 3 big trees near it. They waited a long time. After a while, Tom felt that he must talk.
Huck, do you believe that the dead people are pleased to have us here?
I wish I knew.
Huck, do you think Hoss Williams hears us talking?
His spirit hears us.
I wish I had said Mr. Williams. But all the people said Hoss.
You must be careful how you talk about dead people, Tom. There was no more talk for a while. Then Tom touched Huck's arm.
Did you hear it? There it is again. Now you hear it.
The two held each other with fast-beating hearts. Tom, they're coming. What shall we do?
I do not know. Will they see us?
Tom, they can see in the dark like cats. I wish I had not come.
Oh, do not be afraid. We are doing nothing. If we are completely quiet, perhaps they won't see us.
I will try, Tom, but I'm shaking.
Listen.
The sound of voices came from the far end of the graveyard.
Look. See there,
said Tom.
What is it? It is devil fire. Oh, Tom, this is very bad.
Some dark shapes came near, carrying a light. Huckleberry said, shaking more,
It is the devils, 3 of them. Tom, we are in great trouble. Can you pray? I will try.
Tom began to pray.
Tom, they are human. That is old Muff Potter's voice.
He's drunk as usual. He won't see us."
Huck, I know another voice. It is Indian Joe.
"Devils would be better than that half-Indian. What do they want here?" Then the boys were quiet, because the three men had arrived at the new grave. "Here it is," said the third voice. In the light the boys saw the face of young Dr. Robinson. He was so near that the boys could have touched him. "Hurry, men," he said. "The moon may appear from behind the clouds." The other two men began opening the grave. For a while no sound was heard except the sound of their work. Then they came to the box which contained the body. They opened it and lifted the body out of the box. The moon appeared, and the dead man's face could be seen. Potter held up a knife. "Now, Doctor, the thing is ready, and here it stays, unless you pay us $5 more." "You have your money," the doctor said. "You and your father once sent me to jail," Indian Joe said. 5 years ago. Do you think I would forget? Now, you pay." The doctor hit him suddenly, and Indian Joe fell. Potter dropped his knife. "You hit my friend," he said. He jumped at the doctor, and the two began fighting. Now Indian Joe was on his feet again. He picked up Potter's knife and began moving like a cat around and around the fighters. He was watching for a chance to strike the doctor. Suddenly the doctor was free. He picked up a board and used it to strike Potter, who fell quickly to the ground. At the same moment, Indian Joe saw his chance. The whole length of the knife went into the doctor's body. The doctor fell, partly on Potter, covering Potter with his blood. Clouds covered the moon, and the two boys ran into the darkness. When the moon appeared again, Indian Joe was looking down at the two men lying on the ground. The doctor made some sounds that were not possible to understand, and then, after a long breath, he was quiet. The Indian said, "Now, that is finished." He put the knife in Potter's right hand. Then he sat down and waited. Soon Potter began to move. His hand closed on the knife. He looked at it and let it fall. Then he sat up and looked at the doctor's body. "What happened, Joe?" he said. "It is a bad business," said Joe. "Why did you do it?" I never did it." Potter was shaking. "I was drunk. I do not remember what happened. Did I do it, Joe? I never wanted to do it." "He hit you, and then you did it. But you have always been good to me, Muff Potter. I won't tell." "Oh, Joe, I will bless you for that as long as I live." And Potter began to weep. This is no time for weeping. You go that way, and I will go this way. Move, now." Potter started running. Joe stood watching him. "He forgets his knife because he is drunk. When he remembers, he will be afraid to return for it." 2 or 3 minutes later, the dead doctor, the body from the grave, the open box, were alone under the moon. The quiet was complete again. Chapter 10. The Promise, the Result of Fear. The two boys ran toward the village. They looked behind them, often afraid that they were being followed. After a while, they came to the edge of the village. There stood an old building which was not used. They ran through the open door and fell to the ground.
"Huckleberry,
What do you think will happen now? If the doctor dies, they'll hang Indian Joe. Tom spoke. Who would tell about it? You and I? If we did, and if Indian Joe did not hang, he would kill us. I was thinking that, Huck. Let Muff Potter tell if he's fool enough. He's usually drunk enough. Tom continued to think. And then he said, Huck, Muff Potter does not know what happened. The doctor had hit him with that board. Huck, are you sure that you won't tell? Tom, we can't tell. You know that. Indian Joe would drown us like two cats if we told. Tom, we must promise never to tell. It must be a strong promise, with writing and blood. Tom agreed with all his heart. This idea was what must be done. It was deep and dark and fearful. This was the hour and the place to do it. He found a clean, broad piece of wood. In his pocket he found something to write with. The moon was his light. Painfully he formed the words, Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer promise they will never tell about this, and they wish they may die in their footsteps if they ever tell. Then each boy cut a finger and signed in blood, T.S. and H.F. Tom helped Huck to write his H and F. Then they made a hole in the ground near the wall of the building. They placed the piece of wood in the hole and covered it with earth. Now they were certain. Their mouths would never speak about what their eyes had seen. When Tom entered his house through his bedroom window, the night was almost gone. He took off his clothes very quietly and lay down. He believed happily that his aunt would never know that he had been away. But Sid was not asleep. The next morning his aunt gave him some food. Then she wept, and she asked him why he hurt her old heart. She wished to help him to be good. She tried and tried, but she could try no more. 1,000 beatings would have been easier for Tom. He wept, he promised to be good, but he felt that she did not believe his promises. He went to school, and there the teacher beat him and Joe Harper because they had run away from school the day before. Then he went to his seat. A hard object covered in paper was waiting for him there. He opened the paper. Inside was the bright, shining ball that looked like gold that he had given to Becky Thatcher. This was too much. Now his heart was broken. Chapter 11. Tom's Troubled Mind. At noon the whole village suddenly knew the fearful news. The story traveled quickly from man to man, group to group, house to house. The school teacher closed the school. The knife had been found. It was known to be Potter's knife, and Potter had been seen washing himself in a small stream in the very early morning. When seen, he had run away. All this was very strange, especially because Potter almost never washed. All the people in the town were slowly going toward the graveyard. Tom joined them. He did not wish to go, but something seemed to force him. He arrived at the fearful place and saw the scene again. It seemed 100 years since he had seen it before. A hand touched his arm. He turned. His eyes met Huckleberry's. Both looked away. Were they being watched? Now Tom began to shake because he saw Indian Joe. Then Muff Potter appeared. A few people saw him. They shouted. The crowd separated and Potter walked through. A village law officer was holding his arm. Potter's eyes showed his fear. When he stood beside the dead doctor, he put his face in his hands and began to weep. "I did not do it, friends," he said. "I did not do it." "Who said you did?" a voice shouted. Potter lifted his face and looked around without hope. He saw Indian Joe and said, "Oh, Indian Joe, you promised me that you would never—"
"Is this your knife?"
It was held by the law officer for him to see. Potter began to fall. Men caught him and let him go slowly down to the ground. Then he said, "I thought that I should come and get—" He stopped, shaking. Then he said, "Tell him, Joe. Tell him." Indian Joe told his story. Huckleberry and Tom stood not able to speak, and with eyes wide with fear. They expected the skies to open with a sudden storm to strike down Indian Joe. But he finished his story and stood there, living and whole. They wished to tell the truth, but they did not dare. During a week after this, Tom could not sleep well. One morning, Sid said, "Tom, you talk in your sleep so much I can't sleep half the night." Tom's face became white, and he looked away.
"This is bad,"
said Aunt Polly.
"There's something in your mind, Tom. What is it?" "Nothing."
But Tom's hand was shaking. He could not lift his cup.
"And you say fearful things," Sid said. "Last night you said, 'It is blood, it is blood.' You said that again and again. Then you said, 'Do not hurt me, I will tell.'" "Tell what?"
Aunt Polly said,
"I understand. It is that killing. I dream about it also."
Mary said that she also dreamed about it. And then Sid stopped talking. Slowly, Tom's mind grew quieter, and his sleep was easier. Almost every day during this bad time, Tom went to the jail window and gave Potter some small gift. Then he felt happier. The village people wanted to put Indian Joe in jail also. Like Muff Potter, he had been helping the doctor to carry away that dead body from its grave. But the people did nothing. All were afraid of Indian Joe. Chapter 12. Tom Shows His Kindness. Tom had a new and great trouble. Becky Thatcher was ill. He was afraid that she might die. The joy of life was gone. He played no games. He was not interested in anything. His aunt did not know what was wrong. She tried to find some help for him. She was always reading about health. She read about how to go to bed, and how to get up from bed, what to eat, and what to drink, and what clothes to wear for good health, and how to think for good health. She believed all that she read. When she read something new, she wanted to try it. She took Tom outside in the early morning and poured cold water over him. Then she covered him with a wet cloth and put him to bed with heavy covers over him. When he was so hot that water formed on his skin, she was happy. She thought that this would help him. But Tom became sadder and sadder. She tried pouring hot water over him instead of cold. She tried less food. Soon, Tom stopped fighting against what she did, and then she was sure that he was very ill indeed. Next, she heard of something new named painkiller. She put some in her own mouth to taste it. It was like a mouthful of fire. She gave some to Tom and watched him. This painkiller had a strong result. The boy was wildly interested. He acted as if she had built a fire under him. She knew that she had found the right thing, and Tom knew that it was time for him to act. He thought of several plans. He decided to say that he liked painkiller. He asked for it so often that his aunt gave the whole container to him. Now he could have painkiller at any time. She did not know that every day he put some in a hole in the floor. One day as he was doing this, the cat came in and seemed to want some of the painkiller.
"You do not want it, Peter."
But Peter continued to seem to ask for it.
"Are you sure?"
Peter was sure.
"You have asked for it, and I will give it to you. I am a kind boy, but if you do not like it, remember that you asked."
He opened the cat's mouth and put in some painkiller. Peter jumped high into the air and cried a wild cry. Then he started going around and around the room, running against chairs and tables. Next he stood on his back feet and danced with cries of joy. Then he went faster around the room again. Aunt Polly arrived. He rolled over and over and gave one last great cry and jumped through the open window. Tom was on the floor, weak from laughing.
"Tom, what's wrong with the cat? Cats always do that to show their joy."
But Aunt Polly saw the painkiller. She knew what had happened. She caught Tom's ear and pulled him up, then hit him with her hand.
"Why did you do that to the cat?" "Because I'm sorry that he has no aunt to care for him." "Has no aunt? Why do you say that?" "Because if he had an aunt, she would give him a drink that burned his mouth and not think of his feelings. She would say, if the drink was good for a human, it would be good for a cat."
Aunt Polly thought, if it hurt a cat, it might hurt a boy also. She put her hand on Tom's head.
"I was trying to help you, and I was trying to help Peter, and it helped him. I never saw him move so fast."
He was smiling at her now.
"Oh, Tom, I will not give you any more painkiller. Go to school and try to be a good boy."
Tom was early at school. He was often early now. Today, as he often did, he waited at the gate. He did not play. He was sick, he said, and he seemed sick. Jeff Thatcher came down the road, and Tom's face was brighter, but quickly it was dark again. Jeff was alone. When he saw a girl's dress far away, he watched and watched. But the girl was never the right one. He entered the school and sat down to suffer. Then one more dress came through the gate. Tom's heart jumped. The next moment he was outside again, shouting, laughing, running after other boys, jumping over the fence, standing on his head. He was doing all this to make Becky Thatcher watch him. She never looked at him. Was it possible that she did not see him? He came running and shouting. He threw a boy's hat over the schoolhouse. He ran through a group of boys, and then he fell at her feet. She turned away with her nose raised high in the air.
"Some people always want other people to look at them."
His face became red. He stood straight and walked quietly away. Chapter 13. The Young Pirates. Tom had decided now. He was sad and without hope. He was a boy with no friends. No person loved him. He had tried to do what was right, but they would not let him. Yes, they were forcing him into a bad life. He could now choose nothing else. He had come far from the village. He heard the distant school bell, and he knew that he would never hear it again. Tears fell from his eyes. Here he met his best friend, Joe Harper. Joe's eyes were filled with anger, and it was easy to see that there was a great and sad purpose in his heart. Tom said that he was going to travel around the world, never to return to the village. He hoped that Joe would not forget him. And Joe had come to say the same to Tom. They were two souls with only one thought. Joe's mother had beaten him, but he had done nothing. She plainly wished him to go away. Therefore, he was going. He hoped that she would be happy now. He hoped that she would never be sorry about sending her boy into the cold world to suffer and die. The two boys walked together. They agreed to be like brothers. They would never separate until they died. They began to plan. They decided to be pirates. 3 miles south of the village there was an island in the river. The Mississippi River was a mile wide there. The island was long and not very wide, and it was covered with trees. No people lived on it, and few people lived on the river's shore near the island. It would be a good place for pirates. Then they met Huckleberry Finn, and he joined them. They talked, and then they separated. They would meet again beside the river 2 miles north of the village at 12 that night. Tom knew where they could find a small boat. They would take it. Each boy would bring food and other useful things if possible. Tom arrived with meat and a few other things. He stopped among the trees on a hill above the meeting place. There were many stars, and it was very quiet. The great river lay like an ocean at rest. Tom listened a moment, but the quiet was broken by no sound. Then he whistled gently. The whistle was answered from below. Tom whistled 2 more times and was answered again. Then a voice said,
Who goes there? Tom Sawyer, the Black Pirate. Name your names.
Huck Finn, the Red-Handed, and Joe Harper, the Destroyer of the Seas. Tom had taken these names from his best-loved books.
Speak the word.
2 voices spoke together.
Blood, blood.
Tom went down the hill to join them. The Destroyer of the Seas had also brought meat, and Finn, the Red-Handed, had some tobacco. The Black Pirate said that they must also have fire. They went to a large riverboat that was near, and they took some of the fire burning there. They knew that there were no men on the boat. The boatmen were all in the village. But the boys moved very quietly and carefully. Pirates must be pirates. With Tom as captain of their ship, they left the shore and went into the middle of the river. From here, they let the moving river carry them along. They passed the distant village. 2 or 3 lights showed where it was, peacefully sleeping. The Black Pirate stood in the boat, looking for the last time at the scene of his early joys and later sufferings. He wished that his aunt could see him now, facing the fearful future with a smile on his lips. After 2 hours, their boat touched the island. There was an old sail in the boat. They spread this over their supplies under the trees. They would sleep in the open air, as pirates should. They built a fire and cooked some meat. It seemed wonderful to be eating in that wild, free manner in the forest, far from other people. They said that they would never return to a village or town again. After eating, they lay on the ground, talking. The fire lighted their faces and trees near them with a red light. Huck prepared to smoke some of his tobacco. Soon he was blowing out a cloud of smoke, and the other pirates were wishing that they could do the same. Huck said, "What do pirates do?" Tom said,
Oh, they enjoy life. They follow other ships and catch them and burn them. They take the money from those ships and put it in a deep hole in the ground on the island. Then they kill the people on the ships. They carry the women to the island,
said Joe.
They do not kill the women. No, Tom agreed. Pirates are good. They do not kill the women, and the women are always beautiful. And their clothes are covered with gold and silver, said Joe.
Whose clothes? Said Huck.
The pirates.
Huck looked down at his clothes.
I am not dressed for a pirate, he said, but these are my only clothes.
The other boys told him that the fine clothes would come later when they began their adventures. Slowly their talk ended. The red-handed went to sleep quickly. The destroyer of the seas and the black pirate could not sleep so quickly. They began now to have some doubt. Had it been wrong to run away from home? Had it been wrong to take the meat? The meat did not belong to them. They decided that they would never again take what did not belong to them. And with that decided, these pirates also were peacefully asleep. Chapter 14. Island Life. Tom quietly leaves. Opening his eyes, Tom wondered where he was. He sat up and looked around. Then he remembered. It was cool, and the light was the gray color of early morning. There was a delightful feeling of rest and peace in the deep quiet of the forest. A thin blue breath of smoke rose from the fire. Joe and Huck were yet asleep. Now, far away, a bird called. Another answered. Slowly, the cool gray of the morning changed to white. More sounds were heard. The life of the forest began to show itself to the watching boy. Bugs appeared and started their day's labors. Birds were making many noises now. A big bluebird stopped very near to Tom. It turned its head to one side and sat watching its strange new neighbors. Small animals appeared, and they also looked at the boys and seemed to be talking to them. Perhaps they had never seen a human being before. Perhaps they did not know whether or not to be afraid. Tom called to the other pirates. Within a few minutes they were all playing in the river near the shore. Their boat had been carried away, but this pleased them. They were certain now that they would never return to their village. Happy and hungry, they built their fire. Huck had found some good water to drink. While Joe cooked some meat, Tom and Huck went to the river and caught some fish. Joe cooked these with the meat. No fish had ever tasted so good. Then Huck smoked. After that, they all started to walk through the trees to see what they could discover. They found much to delight them, but nothing surprising. The island was almost 3 miles long and 1/4 of a mile wide. It was very near to the shore on one side, but far from the shore where their village was. They played in the river often. It was the middle of the afternoon before they returned to their fire. They ate some meat again, and then they sat in the shade to talk. But the talk soon stopped. The quiet, the loneliness were beginning to change their happiness. They began to be sad. Tom and Joe were thinking of home. Finn the red-handed, who had no home, was thinking of the places where he usually went to sleep. But they did not speak to each other of this weakness. Now they heard a distant sound. They looked at each other and listened. There was a long quiet, and then the sound. Then a long, long quiet, and then again.
We must go and see.
They jumped up and ran to the shore nearer the town. The trees there were small and grew thickly. Through them the boys looked across the water. They saw a big riverboat. It was the boat that crossed the river many times every day. Now it was coming slowly down the river. It was crowded with people. There were many small boats around it. Then from the riverboat came a cloud of white smoke, and then another boom.
I understand now,
said Tom.
Some person is drowned.
That is right, said Huck. They did that last summer when Bill Turner was drowned. A big gun makes that boom, and then the body rises to the top of the water.
I wish I was on that riverboat now,
said Joe. I wonder who is drowned, said Huck. They continued to listen and watch. Then a thought came into Tom's mind like a sudden light.
Boys, I know who is drowned. They are looking for us.
This was a wonderful thing to know. Hearts were breaking for them. Tears were falling. People were sorry that they had not always been kind to them. The whole town was talking about them. This was fine. It was good to be a pirate. All doubt of that was gone. As darkness came, the riverboat returned to her usual business. The pirates returned to their fire. They were joyful that they were so important and were causing so much sadness. They caught more fish to eat. Then they talked about what the village people were thinking and saying. But as the night grew darker, they stopped talking and sat looking into the fire. Tom and Joe thought of persons at home who were not enjoying all of this. Joe began to speak of returning to the village. Tom laughed at him. Huck joined with Tom. Huck fell asleep. Then Joe fell asleep. Tom sat for a long time watching the others. Then he stood up. He found 2 pieces of thin wood on which he could write. After writing on the wood, he put one piece in Joe's hat. He put the other in his pocket. Then, carefully, he moved away among the trees. When he knew that they could not hear him, he began to run toward the river. Chapter 15. Tom learns what is happening. A few minutes later, Tom was walking into the water toward the shore where the riverboat was tied. The stream was not wide here, but it was strong. It carried Tom south, but after a while he arrived at the river's edge. He found a good place and pulled himself out of the water. He began walking north through the trees, near the shore. He arrived at an open area across the river from the village. The riverboat was lying near. Everything was quiet under the stars. Watching with both eyes, he entered the water again. There was a small boat tied behind the large boat. Soon he was pulling himself into the small boat. After a minute or two, he heard a bell. The riverboat began to move. He knew that this was the last time it would cross the river that night. 12 minutes later, the boat stopped. Tom was quickly in the water again, swimming to the shore. Soon he had jumped over the fence behind his aunt's house. He looked through a window into a lighted room. There sat Aunt Polly, Sid, Mary, and Joe Harper's mother. They were talking. They were beside the bed, and the bed was between them and the door. Tom went to the door and opened it quietly. He thought that he might be able to go inside without being seen. He began moving carefully on his knees.
I feel a wind. Is that door open?
Said Aunt Polly.
How strange. Many strange things are happening now. Sid, go and close the door.
Quickly, Tom went under the bed. Sid did not see him.
But,
said Aunt Polly,
he was not bad. He was only wild and full of life, like any young animal. He did not wish to do bad things, and no boy ever had a kinder heart.
She began to weep.
My Joe was the same. He was not really bad, and he was always kind, and now I shall never see him again. I am sorry for so many things. Only yesterday the cat...
Weeping, Aunt Polly told about the cat and the painkiller. Tom was weeping a little now. He could hear Mary weeping also. Had he really always been a good boy? It was quite surprising to think this. But now he was beginning to believe it. He wished to rush out from under the bed. He wished to fill his aunt with joy. But he remained still and listened. Their small boat had been found 5 or 6 miles down the river. Now, hope for them was gone. On Sunday, the whole village would pray in the church for the boys' souls. Mrs. Harper went home. Sid and Mary went to bed. Then Aunt Polly prayed for Tom. Her words and her old voice were filled with love. Tom's tears began falling again. Then she got into bed. She talked to herself, and she turned over again and again. Tom remained quiet for a long time, but at last she was still. Now the boy came out and looked down at her. He loved her, and he was very sorry for her. He took from his pocket the piece of wood with his writing on it. He placed it on a table. She would see it there in the morning. But then a new thought came to him. He considered it. His face grew bright. He put the wood into his pocket again. Then he kissed his aunt's lips and went out the door. He returned to the river and to the riverboat. There was a man who guarded the boat, but he would be sleeping. Tom knew that. It was easy to take the small boat. He got into it and moved it first up the river. Then he crossed to the other shore. He had often crossed the river in a small boat, and he knew how to do it. He considered taking the small boat to the island. A real pirate would keep the boat. But people would try to find it, and they might find the boys also. He got out of the boat and walked south along the shore. At daylight, he could look straight across the stream and see the island. He rested. Then he entered the water. Soon he was on the island. He heard Joe say, "No, Tom is true, Huck. He will return. What has he been doing, I wonder?" "Here I am," cried Tom, stepping out from among the trees. In a short time they had caught more fish and were eating them. Tom told his adventures. Then Tom found a place in the shade. There he was able to sleep until noon. Chapter 16. A Night Surprise. The boys played in the water and on the shore, but the next day Joe was very sad. Would he ever be happy again? It did not seem possible. Huck was also sad. Tom was not happy, but he tried to seem happy. He had something interesting to tell them, but he was not yet ready to speak. However, if they did not feel better soon, he would be forced to tell it. He said, trying to seem happy,
I think there have been pirates on this island before. How would you like to find an old box full of money? We should go and hunt for it.
but the other boys were not interested. Joe said, Boys, I want to go home. It is very lonely here.
Oh, no, Joe, you'll feel better soon,
said Tom.
Think of the good fishing here.
I'm not interested in fishing. I want to go home.
But, Joe, this is the best swimming place.
I do not want to swim. I want to go home.
Baby, you want to see your mother.
Yes, I do want to see my mother, and you would want to see your mother if you had a mother. I am not a baby.
But you like it here, Huck. You want to stay? You and I will stay?
Huck said, Yes. He did not seem very sure.
Let Joe go if he wants to go,
Tom said.
We do not need him.
Joe began to walk into the water, to start swimming toward the shore where the village was. Tom looked at Huck. Huck looked away. Then Huck said, I want to go, Tom. We can go, Tom, can't we?
I won't. You can go, but I'm going to stay.
Huck started to walk sadly away. Tom felt a strong desire to follow. He hoped that they would stop, but they went slowly forward. Suddenly, Tom knew that it had become very lonely and quiet. He ran after the other boys, shouting,
Wait! Wait! I want to tell you something.
They stopped and turned, and he began walking into the water towards them. They listened to him without an answering word or smile. But after a while they began to understand. Then they shouted with joy. They said that he should have told them his plan sooner. That night after eating, Tom wanted to learn to smoke. Joe wanted to try also. With Huck's help, they began. Tom said,
This is easy. I could have learned long ago.
This is nothing, said Joe. I could smoke all day. I do not feel sick. Tom said,
I wish that the other boys could see us now. Listen, we won't tell them. And then sometime when they are with us, I will say, Joe, I want to smoke. And you will say, my tobacco is not very good. And I will say, it does not need to be good if it is strong enough. And then we'll both start smoking and surprise them.
That'll be good, Tom. I wish I could do it now.
And we will tell them that we learned to smoke when we were pirates, and they will wish that they had been here.
The talk continued, but after a little time there was less talk. Joe said, I've lost my knife. I'm going to find it. Tom said,
Let me help you. You go that way, and I will go this way. No, do not come, Huck. We can find it.
Huck sat down again and waited an hour. Then he was lonely, and he went to find his friends. Both were very white. Both were asleep. But he knew what had troubled them was gone now. That night they did not talk much. When Huck began to smoke, they said no, that something they had eaten made them feel a little sick. In the middle of the night, Joe opened his eyes and called to the other boys. There was a strange heaviness in the air, and it made them all afraid. The night was very hot, but they moved near to each other and near to the fire. sitting like that. They waited. A sudden light filled the sky. It turned night into day, and then it was gone. A fearful noise rolled across the sky and slowly ended far away. A breath of cold wind passed. The sudden light appeared and went away again, and the noise that followed came sooner and was more fearful each time. A little rain began to fall.
Quick, boys, run for cover!
Tom shouted. They jumped up and ran, each toward a different place. A strong wind rushed through the trees. The bright light appeared and went away, appeared and went away again. The fearful noise seemed to never stop. And now a heavy rain came down and ran in streams over the ground. The boys shouted, but their voices were lost in the storm. After some time they came to the place where the old sail was, and pulled it over them. It was a wild night for these boys. The wind caught the old sail and carried it away. Trees fell. The storm increased until they feared it might carry the island away. But the storm grew weaker and weaker, and peace returned. The boys found that their fire was not quite dead. They put some more wood on it, making it burn brightly again. They found some of their meat and cooked it. Then they sat by their fire until morning, talking of the night's adventure, because there was no dry place for them to sleep. When the sun began to shine, they rested in its warm light near the shore. There they remained, sleeping, until the sun became too hot. Then they had something to eat again. The desire for home was now strong in all of them. Tom tried to find a new game to interest them. He found one. They were not pirates now. They were Indians, and had many fierce battles. However, when the day ended, they smoked together, as Indians always did to show that they were at peace. And two of them learned joyfully that now they could smoke a little tobacco without being sick.